Hello, good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Donald C. Stewart and here at Broadcasting Scotland Studio we are delighted to be linked up and joined by good friend of the programme Martin Docherty-Hughes MP for Western Bartonshire, the SNP Defence spokesperson in the House of Commons. Martin, thank you very much for joining us. Delighted to have you with us.
Great to be here. Nice to see everybody.
And of course, as we always do, we begin this evening with our Ukrainian update on day 573 of the illegal Russian attack on the sovereign state of Ukraine. 2 people have been killed by Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities overnight, according to local authorities in Lviv and Kherson. Russia struck 3 industrial warehouses in a drone strike on the western Ukrainian city of Lviv early today, causing a huge fire and killing at least 1 person. Lviv Mayor Andrei Sadovyi said the body of a man who worked at one of the warehouses had been found under the rubble. Sadovyi said the warehouses stored windows, household chemicals and humanitarian aid. Russian forces also shelled the southern city of Kherson, killing a policeman and wounding 2 civilians on a trolley bus. The head of the city's military administration said. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia had launched a total of 30 drones and 1 Iskander ballistic missile in attacks on Ukraine overnight, and that 27 of the drones had been shot down. Yevgeny Belitsky, head of the Russian-imposed administration of the occupied Zaporizhzhia region, claimed the Russian forces destroyed a column of armoured vehicles and Ukrainian troops that was moving towards the village of Rybotin this morning. Volodymyr Zelensky will address the UN General Assembly in person today for the first time since Russia's invasion in February 2022. The Ukrainian president earlier visited Staten Island University Hospital, where Ukrainian soldiers have been treated for amputations. And in The Hague today, Ukraine told the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, the UN's highest court, that Russia justified waging war against Ukraine by invoking a terrible lie, namely that Moscow's invasion was to stop an alleged genocide. The international community adopted the Genocide Convention to protect. Russia invokes the Genocide Convention to destroy. Ukrainians Representative Anton Kornevich told judges. He called on the ICJ to hear the case fully, a rule that Russia must pay reparations for invading under a false pretext. Russia's biggest weapons producer has claimed to have ramped up the production of missiles, drones, combat vehicles and artillery by more than tenfold to supply the Russian army in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin will travel to Beijing in October for direct talks with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Denmark's Defence Minister, Troels Lund Poulsen, has said that his country will donate a further 30 Leopard 1 tanks and 15 T-72 tanks to Ukraine. 1 cargo vessel carrying grain has left the Ukrainian Black Sea port of Chornomorsk for the first time since the grain deal collapsed, in a test of Ukraine's ability to unblock its seaports for grain export. General Alexander Syrsky, the commander of Ukrainian ground forces, hailed the recent recapture of 2 eastern villages, Andriivka and Klishchivka, as an important breakthrough that breached Russian lines near the shattered city of Bakhmut. And as always, my apologies for any Ukrainian names that I am mispronouncing. Martin, I noticed today that Zelensky had made a fairly bold claim that Vladimir Putin was a bit like Adolf Hitler, and certainly the way in which the Russians have behaved would seem to give a lot of people in the international community some kind of license to misbehave globally. But it seems to be a very stark description of his enemy.
Well, I think if there's one country in the world that probably knows how the Nazis treated them and the like, such as probably Ukraine, given how they had to deal with National Socialism, but also the barbarism of Joseph Stalin. So I don't think anyone would be surprised that President Zelensky would be using that type of terminology, as we're on the verge of reaching, I think, about 1,000, we're not far off 1,000 days of this illegal invasion by the Russian Federation.
Indeed, and coming Back home, First Minister has announced today up to £2.5 million to support the WHO Health for Life Fund. That was First Minister Humza Yousaf pledging up to £2.5 million over the next 5 years to the Health for Life Fund, which supports global action and progress on the prevention of non-communicable diseases such as heart attacks, strokes and cancers. The fund is coordinated by the World Health Organization, WHO, the United Nations Development Programme, the UNDP, and United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF. The investment will be announced at an event at the UN General Assembly and will help drive Global South-led action to support countries to build stronger health systems by tackling non-communicable diseases, which continues to be a leading cause of death and disability globally. The WHO invited Scotland to become the first high-income donor to the Health for Life Fund, following our collaboration with Global South partners on tackling non-communicable diseases as outlined in the 2023-24 Programme for Government. The First Minister is also meeting with the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, in New York. This is the first time a WHO Director has met with a First Minister of Scotland. First Minister Humza Yousaf said this is a significant step which cements Scotland's role as a global champion in tackling non-communicable diseases and highlights the important contribution we can make when it comes to tackling health emergencies across the world. I am very proud to be able to announce our plans to become the first high-income country to contribute to the World Health Organization's Health for Life Fund. This investment will allow us to support the development of new programmes to improve healthcare and build stronger health systems in Malawi, Zambia and Rwanda. The WHO predicts that by 2030, non-communicable diseases such as heart attacks, strokes and cancers will be the primary cause of death across sub-Saharan Africa, with around 3.8 million premature deaths. Scotland has long-standing expertise in delivering action to tackle non-communicable disease domestically, which is why we are well placed to share learning beyond our borders and with partners like the WHO. He continued, the funding that I am confirming today makes Scotland the first high-income country to support the vital Health for Life Fund, but I very much hope that we will not be the last. Martin, very much a contrast there in terms of talking about the conflict in Ukraine and Scotland making, not for the first time it has to be said, a major contribution to some form of global initiative in order to support those less fortunate than ourselves, and particularly Malawi mentioned, and there's a long history of cooperation between Scotland and Malawi, but other countries there, notice Rwanda, perhaps a very different way of supporting African countries than the Westminster government thinks that they should.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the first instance, the fact that the WHO actually invited the First Minister and the Scottish Government to participate in the programme is an endorsement of the Scottish Government and how it approaches, even in a devolved position, its role as a player in supporting people who are worse off than we are. And I think at a time when we are seeing consistent disinvestment in international aid, and we see how that's panning out around the world, notably across the entire continent of Africa, where we're seeing coup after coup this summer. I think it's a bold endorsement by the First Minister about how he sees an independent Scotland playing a part as a global partner, working along with colleagues across the world.
And going from the international news, closer to home, recorded crime today has been announced to have gone down, but sexual and violent crime has increased. According to Scotland's chief statistician, who has released the latest figures for recorded crime in Scotland for the year ending June 2023. Police in Scotland have recorded 292,702 crimes in the year ending June 2023. This was 2% higher than the crimes recorded in the year ending 2022, but 4% lower than the crimes recorded in the year ending June 2019. The statistics noted that the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic, and associated measures to limit social contact had an impact on both the type and volume of crime recorded since March 2020. The largest impact was seen during year ending 2021, in June, and to a lesser extent the years ending both in 2020 and 2022. The final legal restrictions lifted in April 2022 meant the most recent year, which is the year we've just come to the end of in June 2023, was not impacted by those restrictions. The recording of crime for that period remains at one of the lowest levels seen for a 12-month period since 1974. In the year ending June 2023, non-sexual crimes of violence were just under 1% lower compared to the year ending beforehand, which is a decrease from 70,156 down to 70,136, but 4% higher compared to the year ending June 2019. Sexual crimes were just under 1% lower compared to the year ending 2022, decreasing from 14,880 to 14,834, but 8% higher compared to the year ending June 2019. Crimes of dishonesty were 7% higher compared to the year ending June 2022, but 7% lower compared to the year ending June 2019. The number of offences recorded by the police in Scotland in the year ending 2023 was 172,923, 2% lower than was recorded the year previously, and 8% lower than the 187,965 offences which were recorded in the year ending June 2019. Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs Angela Constance commented that the safety and security of the public is my top priority, and these statistics show Scotland continues to be a safe place to live. These continued low levels of crime are due to the efforts across policing, justice and community safety partners to deliver safer communities and our investment in the justice system. With recorded crime remaining at one of the lowest levels seen since 1974, the latest figures show reductions in crimes such as violence, sexual crimes and damage and reckless behaviour. So a feature, I think, Martin, every week I'm in here, of the little incremental changes that are sometimes made by the Scottish Government, which have particular relevance to people's lives. But when it comes to the statistics, you can sometimes get bogged down in it. But, you know, to have the lowest recorded, or be close to the lowest recorded since 1974 in terms of crime, seems to me a significant contribution to making sure that Scotland is a safe place to live in, and credit should be given where credit is due.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, it's a difficult time for everybody, and if you look at the state of the economy, led by inflation, I think we might talk about that later, and the lack of growth, it does mean that the Scottish government has to hand money over to Westminster and gets less back. But everything, of course, costs more. So it is probably, I think the minister would be very upfront. It's very problematic to try and sustain that type of investment and improvement in terms of security of yourself as an individual, of your home and of your property, and also the other issues around sexual violence, especially for social justice, for the police service, for social work, for the funding of women's AIDS organisations. It does become problematic, but the fact that these incremental reductions are happening means that we're on the right path and that intervention works. I would think could consistently go back to the introduction of the violence reductions units in Scotland, which are now being mirrored across not only the rest of the UK, but across the world. So slowly but surely, these are making changes to people's lives in an everyday way that some people probably couldn't understand, but it's to be welcomed. But I do think that in terms of the sexual and violent crime issue, I don't think the pandemic has helped in any shape or form. It certainly made that slightly more problematic. But I would hope that, there might be, I think you said, a slight increase, Donald, that what we are hopefully having a situation is where people feel more comfortable in coming forward about reporting sexual and violent crime.
I think one of the issues of the last 72 hours or so in terms of any form of sexual crime, that there's prominence in the mainstream media, but one of the things that hopefully, you're absolutely right, that what we're seeing is that people are willing to come forward and report it because they have some faith in a system that is going to treat them with some form of respect. And that, in essence, is vitally important if we are going to address many of these issues correctly and properly.
Yeah, the only thing I would maybe add is that what I think we still need to tackle is the issues around sexual violence specifically, and getting people who have committed a crime to court, and making sure that the evidence is sustainable and placed before the courts. I know there's a lot of work getting done at the Scottish Government. So in terms of making sure that that improves, I think that's where we will next be moving on to, in terms of making sure that people who have been the victim of sexual and violent crime not only feel comfortable coming forward, but the courts are actually listening to them.
Absolutely. And you alluded to the fact that we are going to talk about high inflation, and it's the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, who has forecast that United Kingdom growth will remain unchanged at 0.3%, the third weakest in the G20, and cut its estimate from UK growth in 2024 from 1% to 0.8%, with only Argentina weaker in the G20. The United Kingdom is expected to have the highest inflation in the G20 after Turkey and Argentina, with an average rate for 2023 of 7.2%, before dropping closer to the middle of the pack with a rate of 2.9% expected in 2024. The impact of higher interest rates to tackle sky-high inflation after Russia's invasion of Ukraine has added to pressure on households and businesses, with the Bank of England having increased interest rates no fewer than 14 times to 5.5%, with a further increase expected this very week. Eurozone inflation today fell to 5.2%. Commenting, the SNP's economy spokesperson Drew Hendry MP said, "Under the economic mismanagement of the Tories and the chaos induced by their Brexit supported by Labour, the UK is in a state of decline. That has real implications for households struggling through the Tories' cost of living crisis, which has driven up mortgages, food prices and energy bills. People in Scotland should not be made to bear the brunt of Westminster's incompetence and failure to own up to their mistakes." Martin, one of the things that we've had, of course, over the last 24 hours or so is a former Prime Minister telling us all that she was right all along. There seems to be a bit of a civil war going on within the Conservative Party over pointy fingers as to who's to blame for what. But ultimately, at the end of the day, to be at the bottom of the G20 is a bit of a red face for a party which believes itself the best at running the economy.
Where do you start with this? Brexit is an unmitigated disaster. The Conservatives have put it at the top of their banner. It's it's their raison d'etre, the blue wall, etc., and now getting picked up with the British Labour Party. And no one takes this policy seriously, and because they see the impact on our lives every day. Across the whole of West Dunbartonshire, if you're trying to get a mortgage and you're a first-time buyer, it's nigh on impossible. I mean, you're probably got about, how many months worth of savings on your own wage, taking up your whole wage packet to try and get to the point where you can make a deposit if you're a first time buyer. And that's just replicated across the whole of Scotland. And this is a disaster which is laid firmly at the door of the Conservative Party, whether it's Boris Johnson, who probably didn't believe in Brexit, let's be blunt, and then on to the utter disaster of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. I mean, Donald, I was sitting in the gallery above the chamber when Kwarteng was giving his statement, and there wasn't enough room in the chamber, and it was just extraordinary to listen to. It's what that has unleashed on the UK economy. When you think about Scotland specifically, about our mineral wealth, about the wealth of our people who bring so much as individuals through learning, through our science sector, through our renewable energy sector, through so much more, and how we are being hammered by a policy which the two main unionist parties think is now unnegotiable. I just find it extraordinary that we think that Brexit in any shape or form gives independence to any country, never mind the UK. and that it places power in the hands of the people. It's done nothing but put it into the hands of some of the wealthiest who have made some of the most money, while the rest of the country is literally now on its knees.
Indeed, and I'm still astonished the number of UK political parties that have not actually noticed how bad Brexit has been and started the clamour to return to the euro. And when you get things like inflation in the Eurozone being 5.2% and us seeing inflation, because the thing about inflation, of course, is that all that inflation is how rapidly prices are increasing. When inflation falls, it just means that things are getting more expensive slower. So therefore, what is happening is that people are fooled into this idea of, we're doing really well because, but we're costing you more less than we were, and it just seems to be quite a strange one.
Yeah, I mean, it's just bonkers economics, and I'm no economist. Most parliamentarians are not, but I think even I can, see and agree with the former governor of the Bank of England that this is the kind of statements he was making, the kind of failed state on the channel. Well, I have to say to Mark Carney, some of us want to get back into the EU, and for Scotland to be a sovereign, independent member of the largest political and economic democratic union in the world. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope people watching tonight are as well.
Indeed, and we go from bonkers economics in terms of the UK government to some that seems from the outside almost bonkers, which is Michael Gove has to appoint commissioners to run the largest local authority in Europe, Birmingham City Council, as the UK government has announced that commissioners are going to run it as part of a series of drastic emergency measures for England's largest authority, which has in effect declared itself bankrupt. On the 5th of September, the council issued what is called a Section 114 notice, stating it did not have the resources to balance its budget because of a series of problems, including a spiralling equal pay bill and failures in its IT. In a statement to the House of Commons today, English Housing Secretary Michael Gove announced he would be appointing commissioners to intervene and take over the daily running of the council, and he would be launching a local inquiry. Mr Gove blamed poor leadership, weak governance, woeful mismanagement of the city for his actions. In response, Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, said Birmingham has experienced some of the most severe cuts of the last 13 years. Local authorities across the country are struggling, and after 13 years, he can't possibly say it is all their fault. Birmingham Council, which serves more than 1 million people, has a budget shortfall of an eye-watering £87 million for the current financial year, projected to rise to £165 million in 2024-25. Michael Gove has said that the commissioners, led by local government expert Max Collar, would exercise all functions related to the council's governance, financial decision-making and senior appointments. A financial recovery plan for Birmingham, published today, proposed consideration of selling council-owned assets, job cuts, UK government support and a rise in council tax to solve the city's financial woes. Martin, is this just the central government swanning in to impose even more austerity on people who have suffered for 13 years?
Well, as someone who was in local government back in the very early 90s, it was a long time ago, and just before the 2015 election, really acutely aware of how difficult local government can be. There is a bit of duplicity here when it comes, and I don't want to disagree with Angela Rayner. I think Angela's a really nice person. But I would say, Birmingham City Council, in some strange way, was unable to pay women an equal pay, and got themselves in a bit of a scrap because they just didn't want to pay it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to in any shape or form support Gove and his machinations about his battles with local government in England. But I think if the administration in Birmingham had come out clear years ago and said, we need to deal with the issue of equal pay for women in Birmingham, then they probably might not be in a situation that they're in today. And that's a real pity because when we look at Glasgow City Council, which I was on briefly before 2015, and it was an SNP administration who had to tackle the issue of equal pay, not because they needed to, but because they did need to, but because it was the morally right thing to do. You don't give people an unequal wage, and Birmingham clearly, by the looks of it, was putting its head in the sand for some amount of time and not wanting to deal with the realities. And on top of that, the cost of living crisis, it affects them as it affects everybody from the cut through Westminster. So it's a hell of a mess for any local authority, especially Birmingham. I think it's the second largest local authority in England. To be in a major international city, to be in a situation is just catastrophic, I think, for them, for their local democracy. And to see the Tory party try and swoop in, if there is to be a local inquiry, it probably should be a royal commission, less than just a local inquiry.
Indeed, in 2022 it was the host of the Commonwealth Games, and Be Bold, Be Birmingham banners are all over the city still. And one of the things that from the outside looking into many of the English local authorities, they seem to be trying to find methods of raising money that seem rather strange and obscure in terms of investments and so on, and getting increasingly in trouble because of that. But it's interesting as well that you referenced Glasgow. There was a Labour administration in Strathclyde and Glasgow for many a long year, and the legacy of them not paying women an equal pay has been left for others to deal with. And so much so, again, I have a great deal of respect for Angela Rayner and would not wish to miscall where she's coming from. But it seems that what's happening at the moment is that a lot of people are dealing with a Labour Party mess because they wouldn't deal with actually paying women on an equal footing.
Indeed, and Angela's going to find herself between a rock and a hard place, because one week she's telling also the TUC that, in terms of employment rights, there'll be improvements, yet, a couple of days later, the leader of the British Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, makes the announcements around, issues, minimum hours, etc. I just think she's finding herself in a very difficult situation and trying to defend her colleagues in Birmingham, who themselves will have been going through a very difficult time with lots of cuts to English local government and the kind of weird relationship that there is between local government in England and central government in Westminster. I'm not saying in any shape or form that it's perfect in Scotland, but I think when you have COSLA having, a robust discussion and debate with the Scottish government and coming to formalised agreements, as they have recently, that is a decent relationship. Nothing like that exists south of the border.
Indeed, and we go from one particular conflict of down south to the Section 35 GRR challenge, which has begun in the Court of Session as the Scottish Government has mounted a legal challenge against the decision by the UK Government to block the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill from gaining royal assent by using the Section 35 order under the Scotland Act, and it began in the Court of Session in Edinburgh today. Judge Lady Haldane is presiding over the full hearing, which will sit for 3 further consecutive days. The Scottish Government will set out its argument first over the first day and a half, with the UK Government set to present its response up to day 3, so the following day and a half thereafter. The challenge was a consequence of Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack using a Section 35 order to overturn a law passed by a majority of the members of the Scottish Parliament. In April, First Minister Humza Yousaf said the legal challenge was necessary to defend the Scottish Parliament's democracy from the Westminster veto. According to the 22-page petition published by the Scottish Government in April, officials have challenged the UK Government's order on 4 counts: that Mr Jack made a material error of law, that his concerns about the safeguards in the bill were irrelevant to the order's making, and that his reasons were inadequate, which would make the order unlawful. Scottish Government lawyers also described the Scottish Secretary's decision as irrational in the official documents, and the hearing continues. Martin, we've known that this was coming, and we're now in the battle, as it's supposed, in the heat of it. And I suppose in a sense it doesn't really matter what you think about the bill. What really matters here is the idea that the majority in the Scottish Parliament of all parties who voted this are being told that their vote is meaningless by the government in Westminster.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we have to get to a position where you only 25 years into devolution, that we're still having to try to explain devolution. You know how devolution's supposed to allow us to do things differently in Scotland, and we've done things differently, not only under SNP government and coalition with Greens, but with Labour Party, with coalitions with Liberal Democrats. And we've never had this situation, the idea that divergence, you're too divergent from the UK. Well, we're divergent from the UK in terms of devolved competence in a lot of things. And literally what we see here is a UK government looking for a political opportunity, and it's now ended up in the law courts. And seeking to undermine the value and the worth of the Parliament of Scotland and the people who we elect to sit in it.
Yeah, one would even wonder if they understood the nature of the word diversity. And we found out today that the Edinburgh Tram inquiry has been republished. The report into that inquiry from long overdue, the inquiry into the Edinburgh Trams project being over budget, completed late, was itself criticised for being costly and taking too long. The inquiry found the key reasons leading to the failure to deliver the project within budget included failure by TIE to report accurately in progress, and failure by council officials to monitor progress. The failure of TIE, Trams in Edinburgh, to work collaboratively with the council and others. Transport Initiatives Edinburgh's TIE departure from the procurement strategy that had been intended to manage risk out of the project, and TIE's failure to follow the guidance about optimism bias when preparing various versions of the business case such that the cost of the project was underestimated. Delay with production of design due to poor performance by Parsons Brinkerhoff, and a failure by TIE and the consortium, construction consortium that is, to manage the design contract effectively. There was also criticism of the governance structure, which did not follow any recognised model. There was a lack of clarity as to who had responsibility for the performance of certain tasks, and there was some overlap regarding the respective roles of the various bodies created and the individuals appointed to deliver the project. It is also unclear whether all of the individuals appointed to the specific roles actually fulfilled them. The failure of council officials to protect the council interest as the client and promoter of the project, bearing the risk of exceeding the allocated budget of £545 million. The inquiry also criticised the Scottish Minister's decision to withdraw the involvement in the project of officials in Transport Scotland following a debate in Parliament on June 27, 2007, which the inquiry said resulted in a loss of expertise in the management of major transport infrastructure projects. Responding to the publication of the inquiry report, the Scottish Government Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Mary McCallan, said, "The Scottish Government places the highest importance on the efficient spending of public money. It is why the public inquiry was set up and given statutory powers to thoroughly investigate matters. It is also why we committed significant resources to diligently support the inquiry and to engage meaningfully and openly with it. However, the inquiry took too long, was too costly, and in some instances the evidence heard does not support the conclusion drawn. Clearly, all organisations and individuals who gave evidence to the inquiry, including the Scottish Government and Transport Scotland, who have just received the report, must take our time to consider the detail and the recommendations. Having done that, I will provide a more comprehensive response to Parliament and respond to members' questions in due course." Martin, it's a tram line that seems to just be ever extended beyond the point at which it was supposed to stop. And, the cost did spiral. And from the outside looking in, one of the things that I found quite significant in there, and one wonders if the COVID inquiry is ever going to get to that point, is to look at the appointments made and whether the people fulfilled the roles in there. I know that in the COVID inquiry, it's not so much the roles, but the contracts that were divvied out and given out. But here is a clear indication of something that was well wrong but there seems to be a lack of coordinated planning and coordinated work together in order to make it work.
Well, I think if you go back to 2007, and I'll stand corrected, if I'm wrong here. It's actually Wendy Alexander who I believed proposed an amendment back in June 2007, which was voted through to progress the tram system in Edinburgh, which everyone voted for, bar my parliamentary colleagues and our SNP colleagues in Holyrood. So clearly back then, even people like John Swinney knew something was probably not worth investing, not necessarily worth investing, but something was seriously wrong if you look back at the motion that was approved by Parliament. But that's Parliament's right to go forward with that. So as someone who has a bit of an interest in major public projects and did a wee bit of research into it myself, you could go back to the inquiry into the construction of the Scottish Parliament itself. And we see a range of bad appointments, mismanagement, and issues that could have been resolved or done far better. And I'm sure the Minister will be looking to make sure that if there is any further extension to the tram system, not only in Edinburgh, but anywhere else in the country, that there needs to be a bit of profound learning about how you do this type of contract, especially for technology, which a lot of Europe seems to use on a regular basis, that we've seemingly quite clearly had a few issues trying to implement in our capital.
I hear, and they do it better in Europe. You'd think that you would be falling over yourself to go and find out how they did it over there. And indeed, back in Scotland, exposure to air pollution today at a young age, it was reported, raises early death risks. People exposed to significant air pollution in early childhood are more likely to die early than those raised in areas which better air quality, according to research published today. The analysis of nearly 3,000 people born in Scotland in 1936 is the first to shed light on the lifelong effects of breathing dirty air in early life. Findings show people exposed to high levels of air pollution, aged 3, were more likely to die between the ages of 65 and 86 than those subjected to low levels. Exposure to high levels of air pollution also increased the chances of dying from cancer, especially from lung cancer in women. Previous studies have investigated links between poor air quality and health over time, but few have investigated the effects beyond 25 years, researchers say. The new study, which was led by the University of Edinburgh, has revealed links between air pollution and deaths over a 75-year period. Data analysed by the team was taken from the Scottish longitudinal study birth cohort of 1936, an anonymised, long-term study providing a representative sample of Scotland's population. Historic air pollution levels were estimated using atmospheric chemistry models and matched to each participant's home address in 1939, when they were 3 years old. The analysis also used results from a national cognitive ability test taken by each participant aged 11 and national death records from 1947 to 2022. Senior author Professor Chris Dibben, Director of the Longitudinal Studies Centre Scotland, based at the University of Edinburgh, said, "We are lucky in Scotland to have an increasing number of studies following people from childhood to old age. This is helping us to better understand what type of environments we need now to support healthy ageing in the future." Over the 75-year period, 1,608 of the participants died. Exposure to higher levels of fine particle air pollution, known as PM 2.5, increased the risk of dying between the ages of 65 and 86 by up to 5%. Early years exposure increased the risk of dying from cancer. In women, lung cancer was the main cause of cancer-related deaths, linked to an increasing risk of 11%. In men, preliminary findings suggest early exposure could be linked to an increased risk dying from neurodegenerative disorders in older adulthood. The findings indicate around 25% of the total impact of air pollution on death was an indirect result of effects on participants' cognitive ability. Children exposed to higher air pollution levels tended to score lower in the cognitive ability test. These skills are important for achieving better educational outcomes and higher socio-economic status, which are ultimately linked to living longer. the team says. Martin, it's hardly surprising, I suppose, on one hand, but the evidence there of being in a lower socioeconomic group, being in a place of high pollution, is not likely to lead to better life chances. And one of the things that's been out there, of course, is the lower emission zones and the way in which some local authorities have attempted to do something in order to support and help those who are working and living within city centres, which may cost them politically, as it did with the Labour Party down south, but in terms of the health of young people, seems to be, according to the research, perhaps the right way to go.
Well, I think you'd mentioned, the research was going back to people born in 1936. So if you were born in 1936, say in my hometown, Clydebank, you would have been born into a shipyard town where there would probably be one of your parents, or both of them actually. If usually it would be your dad who would be working on the ship, but also probably your mum, because she might have been working in the draft room, or she might have been, the kind of stereotype of the time, working in the being a cleaner on the ships, cleaning up, and they would probably be covered in asbestos material. So there'd be a whole range of dangerous materials in an era in my borough where I grew up, and also while I was young as well. It seems a bit of a time ago. So it's not a modern phenomena in any shape or form, as the research shows. And I think if anyone thinks that having a go at the low emission zones is a way of growing the economy when people are moving away from city centre shopping, etc., we need to look at the evidence across a broad range of issues about retail, but also, pollution kills people, and it kills people down at the lower end of the social scale and economic scale, and that needs to be tackled. We need to try and reduce those emissions, and we should all be playing our part. But importantly, the big companies need to play their part. It's one thing about saying communities like mine, need to play and individually play their part, but we are forced in some ways to shop in big stores, which have a lot of emissions. We have to access to cars because we've seen a diminution of local working opportunities, because the economy during the kind of from 1945 up until the 1980s was about, big industries, and those have all disappeared. So there's a huge amount of issues here, and I just think we need to concentrate on the fact that pollution kills, and just always mindful that my dad, who is 89, always reminding me as a youngster that these cars are pollutants. Cars are always pollutants as long as they're putting out their oils and petrol. And Dad, you're still right. We just need to learn this lesson. It's clearly a long lesson that we're learning, and we're just not listening. We need to try and reduce emissions as quickly and safely as possible, and justly, so that we have a just transition.
Indeed. And talking about justice and justly, we move to international news, which came in today, that the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said that there is credible evidence that India was behind the alleged assassination of the Sikh leader. Justin Trudeau saying that the credible evidence that India is responsible for that assassination, the alleged assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a prominent Canadian Sikh leader, a claim Delhi has dismissed as absurd. Speaking in the House of Commons of Canada today, the Canadian Prime Minister said that national security authorities had been probing allegations that New Delhi was behind a state-sponsored assassination. Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty, he said. Canada is a rule of law country. The protection of our citizens and defence of our sovereignty are fundamental. Mr. Trudeau said the alleged killing is contrary to the fundamental rules by which free, open and democratic societies conduct themselves. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly said Canada had expelled a key Indian diplomat and expects India to fully collaborate with us and ultimately to get to the bottom of this. India's Ministry of External Affairs said in a statement it rejected statements by Mr. Trudeau and his foreign minister, adding that allegations of India's involvement in any act of violence in Canada are absurd and motivated. The ministry said it would expel a senior Canadian diplomat in response to Mr. Trudeau's claims. New Delhi's decision reflects its growing concern at the interference of Canadian diplomats in our internal matters and their involvement in anti-India activities, the Foreign Ministry said. The allegations from Canada's Prime Minister are likely to further strain relations between the two nations. Trudeau said he raised the issue in no uncertain terms with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi when the two met briefly in New Delhi last week for the G20 summit. The Canadian announcement comes a week after the G20 in New Delhi and is in contrast to the UK government, who declined to call for release of Jagtar Johal from Dumbarton, who has been held in an Indian jail for 5 years on terrorism charges. If we manage to get an independent Scotland, do you think we could get Justin Trudeau and a Scottish passport to come across and give some backbone to? Because I tutor a number of Pakistani and Indian children, and there's a lot of discussion about both Pakistan and India, and particularly about Indian Sikhs and Muslims and so on. And it just seems that there is a push from India to be in a global stage, and perhaps not under Modi the most edifying way of doing it. And I just wish, particularly, we've got a Scottish individual who is currently being held in India, that there doesn't seem to be, but there again, I suppose in a sense after the way that the women in Iran and how Boris Johnson referred to her in Parliament, it seems it's just very much not a mixed message, but a bit of a mess. And you just wish the British government would find a way of getting away to promote justice in the world.
Well, I think, Donald, first of all, in these cases, the British government would really need a backbone. And when it comes to dealing with Narendra Modi and his government, first of all, I think also we need to be very clear that there are millions of people in India who do not agree with Narendra Modi and the BJP, whether because they happen to be Sikh or Christian or Muslim, whether or not they're members of the Congress Party or the Communist Party of India. There are millions of people across the Indian state who do not agree with Narendra Modi. And there is at much risk, as Hardeep was in Canada, and my constituent Jagtar is in an Indian jail. But for a Canadian Prime Minister to stand in the House of Commons in Ottawa and make the statement he did, I think was extraordinary. And what I've seen so far, not only from the Prime Minister here, but also, I must say, a very damp kind of response from the Labour Party, is that Canada, as soon as the accusations were made against Russia about the Salisbury poisonings, Canada was there 100%. Canada took what our intelligence services said as verbatim, as a member of Five Eyes, stepped up to the plate along with so many of our other allies, expelled Russian diplomats, and totally agreed with what our intelligence services were saying. We are not seeing that today from the British Prime Minister, and we're definitely not seeing it from those who want to replace the Tory party in government from the Labour Party. They'll be making some statements tonight about investigations, etc. But quite frankly, they need to be saying that this is unacceptable. And like Canada, really reviewing whether or not they continue their trade negotiations. Canada and India separated those the other week. They broke them off because these are serious allegations of the death of your own citizen in your own country by another state. And that on top of the arbitrary detention of Jagtar Johal, it's just not acceptable when you deem India to be a close ally and friend. And Narendra Modi acts in very strange ways, but he emulates what some people would say the illiberal democratic fashion. But if we can take anything away from this, is that there is still hope. There are millions of people across India today who will be absolutely horrified but not surprised by this at all. And they will be not supporting Narendra Modi. What we should be doing, not only to support Canada, but to support them, is to be supporting Prime Minister.
We seem to have dropped out there. Martin, you're back. I think we lost the last 2 or 3 minutes of your peroration there. I think there was a drop in the signal. I think that you put it far more eloquently than I did in terms of the democracy that India is, that there's a range of opinions out there. And you're right, there will be people who will be very, very upset that such an accusation is made against their country. But it's quite an astonishing thing that a prime minister of one country is willing to stand up, whether it be under parliamentary privilege or not, it doesn't really matter, but accuse another country of operating on their soil in that manner. And we've Adnan Khashoggi aside, and the Salisbury poisonings you alluded to earlier as well. This is a moment in time, because the only world leader who has ever gone to India that I'm aware of in order to pronounce that Modi is a very fine man and a wonderful leader was a certain Mr. Trump, who did so a few years back when he was the president. And it's a bit like, if you want to know who you should trust, look at who their friends are.
Yeah, I mean, just to come in there, Donald, if you look at, and just to kind of maybe go over maybe what you missed, the UK government and the Labour Party need to be explicit in their total support for Prime Minister Trudeau. But yeah, I mean, look at the history of Narendra Modi in the kind of paramilitary organisations that he was involved in prior to becoming Prime Minister, how he still supports them, how the British Council was deemed not suitable the other year in India. Its offices were raided. Some of the documentary it showed about the Indian state being involved in other countries. I've no doubt that also plays part in the continued arbitrary detention of my constituent Jagtar Singh Johal, who is not a dual national. He was born and brought up in Scotland. He comes from Dumbarton, and he now needs the British government to step up to the plate and defend his rights as a UK citizen abroad.
Indeed, and everybody here in Broadcasting Scotland would echo those sentiments in terms of supporting Jagtar Singh Johal in India. And we end tonight with this announcement that Scottish Government is considering plans to improve digital connectivity. Plans to enhance broadband connection speeds in new homes across Scotland are being considered, with a 3-month consultation being launched to gather views about the proposed regulations and how they would be implemented. The proposals would amend building regulations to require developers to ensure that all new build homes are installed with the gigabit-ready physical infrastructure necessary for gigabit-capable connections. A gigabit-capable connection is installed in a new build home, subject to a £2,000 cost cap per dwelling, or where a gigabit-capable connection is not being installed, the next fastest broadband connection is installed within the £2,000 cost cap. Innovation Minister Richard Lochhead said the Scottish Government is committed to providing an efficient and resilient digital infrastructure in Scotland, as set out in our National Strategy for Economic Transformation. The importance of an effective digital connection has been highlighted during recent years. It enhances the way we work, communicate with friends and family, and access vital public services. A key theme of our digital strategy is ensuring that no one is left behind, and that is why we are consulting on these proposals as we look to transition to a fair, green and growing economy. Martin, to end up that connectivity, it's one of the things I think that we've probably had that sort of theme running through, whether it be going to Parliament in order to challenge the British government, or to court to challenge the British government, or a foreign Prime Minister standing talking about another foreign government. This connectivity, we're all part of a large global network, and hopefully what that does is ensure that everybody can plug into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one side of it. I happen to be visiting Estonia shortly, and a parliamentary visit. And what gets me is that you can have the connectivity you like. It's fantastic. If you've got high-speed broadband, it's superb. But if the systems that utilize it aren't up to scratch, then it's still problematic. If you were to go to Estonia, you can do so much online. 40% of their last local government election was held online. People were voting online, and people here in Scotland, I think, would usually go, "Oh, I don't want that." It's because they've got ID numbers. And I always come back to the premise, and you might think this is slightly off kilter here with this deliberation, but I think it's really important, because having high-speed connectivity is great, but if the systems that are built using it aren't worth the salt, worth the anything at all, and then what's the point? You might as well go back to pen and paper. So in Estonia, they've got, of course, mandatory ID. What I think we all need to recognise is we already have ID numbers here in Scotland and across the UK. They're called your NHS numbers, they're called your NI numbers. And what those ID numbers do is they lock us out of our information. And what they should be doing is enabling us to see what the state says about us. And that's what happens in Estonia. You can use your NHS number or your national insurance number. The government should be saying, here's that number. And what we're going to do is we're going to up the vast majority of information so you can see what happens. And in terms of some of the other deliberations we're having tonight around, for example, criminal and violent behaviour, when Estonia started to do that, they really started to see a notice in some of these issues where people were able to identify criminality and, yes, even violent behaviour through accessing their own information. We could certainly discuss it some other time, but it's great to have connectivity, but we really need the systems which are utilising the platforms, which are utilising the network to actually be usable. And I think we still have a wee bit of a way to go. And I think we really need to debate about how we, as citizens, are able to access state platforms with their NHS number, if you want to use that, so we can see what the state is saying about us, and so we can access services and also hold government to account. I don't think anybody should be frightened of government being held to account, no matter who the government is. And I think that's one way of doing it, so that we have access to our state information.
Absolutely. And it is that thing about, if you've got a socket, you've got to have something to plug into it that's going to be meaningful to you as an individual. Well, Martin, thank you very much for your time tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure, as it always is. And we've got to the end of tonight. So on behalf of us all here at Broadcasting Scotland, Martin, thank you for joining us tonight in this evening's programme. And yes, that is it for this evening. But before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated so far, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment on behalf of all of us here, thank you very much. Our programmes are always going to be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. It's really important, because our need is to reach £30,000 a year to pay our bills, which is still pressing. However, the generosity of our supporters has given us a little more time. We have now raised over £17,300, which is more than it was last week. And we are able to continue making programmes for the next few weeks. Our need to raise the remaining £12,700 is still really urgent. So if you can, please help us out. Why? Because what we've been able to do tonight is to discuss a number of things which you're probably not hearing about in mainstream media. You're probably not getting the information that you would normally get in mainstream media. We're not here to replace mainstream media, but to add to the options that you have from a uniquely Scottish perspective. And we think that is exceptionally valuable. So if you're able to donate, please do. If you're able to subscribe, please do. If you're able to tweet or Snap or wherever it may be, in whatever social media platform it is today, tomorrow or the next week, please send that message out. And if you want to volunteer, get in contact with us. We're always looking for people front of camera and behind it. But from me, Donald C. Stewart, here in our studios in the south side of Glasgow, it's good night and thank you for watching.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, We will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.